Nobody went to school for sales. Each of us has our own journey, a journey that ultimately reveals the two opposing forces: the art versus science, the relationships versus the metrics, selling versus sales. What side are you on? This is the Love Selling, Hate Sales podcast.
Welcome to the Love Selling Hate Sales podcast. I'm your host, Josh Wagner, and today I'm joined by Roy Raanani, the co-founder and president at Chorus AI. Roy, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you here. If for those of you that don't know, Chorus is a call recording software which is there to record and analyze the meetings of your top performers. And personally, I'm a customer. My entire organization is a customer. So we leverage Chorus to record our calls. We can analyze them. We can have coaching sessions with our bosses so that not everyone has to try to clone themselves and be at every single meeting. Super impactful for our organization. And one of the reasons I wanted to have you here, Roy, is because this whole concept of love selling, hate sales comes from my own personal love for the relationship side of selling and building relationships, closing deals, being in a cycle, the strategy part of it, working with my colleagues to figure all that out. But I really don't like the numbers and the metrics, even though I know it's necessary. So I thought, who better than someone who has a big consulting background, been through all that kind of process alignment, building and all that sort of thing. Now, co-founder of a company that is all about sales enablement, and also the president of the company who obviously cares about the metrics. So first and foremost, what made you found Chorus.ai? Because it seems like it has a sales enablement bend to it.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's a lot more than sales enablement to us. And the reason for that is that at the end of the day, there are many ways that you can be successful in sales. One is through hustle and effort, and the other is through quality. And you can just picture, your two prototypical SDRs or sellers. There might be some that are just on the phone doing 50, 60, 70 dials a day,
right,
and working through. And there are others that will spend, a lot more time focusing on the research, crafting something very personalized, fewer at bats, higher conversion rates. There are many ways that you can be successful. Our belief is that there's a lot of technology to help you with quantity, but there's very little that helps you with quality. And when it comes to scaling a business and growing a business, we believe you really need to understand what great looks like, and you need to be able to deliver consistently great experiences at scale. And it's very, very hard to do that without data. And by data, I don't just mean numbers. It can be anything. The fact that, the most valuable or impactful activity that anybody does is have a conversation with a customer, with a client, with
Absolutely.
a prospect, and that those are black boxes, unless a manager takes the time to join a meeting, makes it really hard for anybody in an organization, especially now during COVID, when all of us are working from home or sheltering in place. How do you even know what's
Absolutely.
going on? And if you don't know what's going on, it's very difficult to inform strategy, make decisions, and drive improvement. And so, the idea behind Chorus was these conversations and these interactions are so valuable. They're happening digitally. They're happening over the phone. They're happening over Zoom. Let's capture them. Let's organize them. Let's make sense of them. And then let's make it really easy for organizations to understand what are our top performers doing on their best days, on their best deals, so we can learn from that. How do we make it easy to replicate and share those best practices with the team so that we all do better? And then how do we take all the information that we're learning across all of our reps and all of our deals and all of our customers to say, how do we do better, and how do we perform better? And that's really it. And so it really does start with enablement. And then ideally it becomes a platform that we can all as leaders rally around. And that's rallying around the voice of the customer.
Yeah, it's huge. And, taking that a step further from the sales side, we're a professional services organization at LeadMD, and we leverage Chorus on the delivery side as well, so that does get that voice of the customer. How are we interacting with the customer day in and day out? our delivery organization happens to be, 5 times the size of our sales organization. So it's not just a sales tool, to your point, but I do think that for the broader context of this conversation, it certainly provides some insight into how we can help enable sellers be better. So one of the concepts that I like to dig in with is just this idea that good sellers, and you talked about the concept of quality versus quantity, and let's look at quality for a minute. I feel like a lot of young reps don't have the ability to have business level conversations with people. Yet we ask them to go take down the C-suite, right? But we're not enabling with that ability to have a C-suite level conversation. Is that anything that you see, maybe not in your organization, but you're obviously people try to sell you as well? What experience do you have with that?
I think it's a great it's a great observation. It's very real. When sellers ask me for advice on book recommendations, for example, my number one go-tos are never books about sales, although there's some amazing ones out there. Selling ultimately is about understanding psychology. It's about understanding businesses. It's about understanding how people make decisions, priorities, budgets, all of those other types of things. And so I think a big part of it is educating our sellers. And it sounds like we're talking about less experienced folks earlier in their careers.
Early on, yeah.
Really educating them on how the world works and how businesses work, and informing that mental model. Because when you have a fully formed mental model, you're going to be able to think quicker on your feet. You're going to be able to improvise. You're going to be able to, get better results. That's very different from memorizing a script.
Right.
And of course, there are different sales, different types of sales organizations. If it's highly transactional, some of our customers are highly transactional, right? They're calling on local business. It's a very simple, very straightforward type of value proposition. It might matter less there, and you can get away with just deeply understanding the value propositions, and ideally, using a product like ours to just spend time listening to those personas. Talk to your delivery team, talk to your customer success team, and just understand what they're dealing with and how your product solves it. Sometimes that's enough, but I do think that as you move up market, as you sell higher value services, as you try to attack the C-suite, or more senior folks, then it really does become, understanding their priorities and understanding how to talk to them. The best advice that I heard about that was I believe it was from Eric Gilpin, I think, who's one of the senior leaders over at Upwork in Chicago, and we were on a panel together, and he talked about using your own team, meaning if you're a company that's selling into marketing, for example, have every SDR or every new sales rep go interview your VP of marketing or your CMO or your head of demand gen. Ask all the dumb questions. Do a brown bag lunch once a week where you talk about those issues. Another great piece of advice that came up on that panel was, as a sales rep, go look at the calendar of that persona, and look at the annual calendar, because you'll start to understand that, for example, for a VP of sales, wow, every quarter we're doing a quarterly business review where, here's the agenda for the meeting. Here's the deck. These are the things that we're talking about. This is what's hitting, their priority list. These are the OKRs. These are the objectives. Once a week, they're doing a pipeline review. Here's that meeting. Here's what they're doing here. Here's what they care about. So you can discern a lot from just looking at, Google Calendar and understanding where are these people spending their time, and then interviewing them to understand, what's going on there. So there are a lot of different ways that you can creatively go about trying to understand those personas, but I completely agree. You got to start with, the fundamentals and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. I hadn't heard that yet. It's just interviewing your own internal folks, because from what I've heard talking to lots of other folks, you've got one of two things, right? The best just kind of figure it out on their own, which I don't know if you always want to rely on that model as a sales leader. And then The other side is someone was brought up, a mentor took them under their wing and just showed them the ropes, right? And they learned that way. And I always think back to when I got out of college, I didn't want a job. So I started a business. Well, you know, at the end of the day, it wasn't really a business, but what I did learn was how to manage cash flow, how to look at a P&L, a balance sheet, what profit margins mean to me, and all these different things, so that now 20 years later, I can have a conversation with you about your business and how it's performing. Well, not everybody does that. A lot of graduation points from college are, oh, let's go be an SDR. And that SDR, to your point, I think a lot of it is the hustle, right? That's what's teach, like do the dials, do the emails, do the quantity. And I love that concept of being able to leverage an internal training program to talk to your own internal people about, okay, this is what a VP of marketing cares about, or a VP of sales or something like that. So that's a really interesting insight. When you came out, it looked like you went into consulting. How did that shape you into this path of a sales, type of career? And I know you're not a seller per se, but how did consulting shape your path?
I was one of those people that really loved consulting, and part of the reason is that I just really love helping people solve their problems, which I think is, when I talk to the sales leaders and the sales people that I admire the most,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them have a very similar lens. Like, I'm not here to sell you something, I'm here to solve your problem.
That's right.
And they think beyond the product or the service that they're selling, and they think about, how do I build a relationship? How do I earn trust? Maybe the best way to get the deal or to build that relationship is by making an introduction to somebody that can help that person, or recommending them to a partner, or maybe even a competitor, and really thinking about it long term. So I got a lot out of consulting just through that lens. The other thing was just around problem solving and understanding operations. One of my most foundational experiences was when I was in my mid-20s. I got sent up to work on a gold mine in interior Alaska.
Oh, wow.
Flew up to Fairbanks. This mine was a couple hours outside of Fairbanks, and there was something really fascinating about a gold mine, and you'll see how it relates to sales. Essentially, in a gold mine, the way that it works is you blow up a bunch of rock. You load that rock using a very expensive piece of equipment into a very expensive truck.
Right.
You haul the rock a couple of miles, and then you drop it at the entry point of a gold mill. And up until that point, you have spent 90% of the cost to run the entire gold mining operation.
Wow.
So 90% of the cost goes into just getting the rock to the front door of the gold mill. And at that point, you have extracted none of the value because, so 90% of the cost, none of the value. And then
Right.
you process that ore, you put it through the gold mill, which costs 10% of the total cost of the mine. But any of the gold that you're going to extract from that rock happens in that 24-hour process where it's going through. And any gold that you don't manage to extract as the ore is passing through the mill literally gets thrown out.
Interesting.
So it goes into a place called a tailings pond. And the reason that was so foundational for me was because, selling, or I shouldn't say selling, the go-to-market motion
Mm-hmm.
is very similar, right? We are investing huge amounts of money into our data, our marketing, our SDRs. We're doing all of this work to get a prospect into the front door, which today is a Zoom meeting.
Yeah, for sure.
And up until that point, we've invested a lot.
Yep.
And we've captured none of the value. And then we have one opportunity as that prospect is going through our experience.
Yep.
To deliver results. And and if they're a good prospect, and like maximize their chances of buying from us. And you start to realize that there's variability in every
Mm-hmm.
process. That was one of my big learnings in the gold mine. You could take the same rock and put it through the mill, and on one day you might get 70%, yield. So, which means you get 70% of the gold out of that,
Right.
ton of rock. And another day you might get 85% out.
Hmm.
And when you add that all up and you say, what would our performance look like if every day we were getting 85% instead of 70%?
Right.
And it turns out that it adds up to a lot of money. And that's, that was my takeaway for sales as well. In every process, there's going to be variability. And typically when there's variability, the more variability there is, the less we understand what's going on, the less we have a tightly controlled process. And so, you look at that variability and you ask yourself, or you ask your team, what's the difference on that day where we do really well versus that day where we don't do as well? And you dig into it and you form some hypotheses, and then you try to put some control around it. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do with, not what we're trying to do, what we do with Chorus with our customers, right?
Right.
You want to look at, going back to your question around metrics, the reason that I like metrics is because they help point you to where you should be spending your time.
Yeah.
Where do we think we can get the biggest bang for our buck? Because every quarter we might only be able to focus on 2 or 3 things maximum. And so where do we think we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck?
Right.
What do we think we're doing differently on our very best days, or maybe our very best reps? How do we understand it? And then how do we consistently do better? And that was really it. So, in consulting, every business teaches you that you should measure the things that matter. You should look for variability. You should try to understand what's driving it. And then just, wake up every morning trying to consistently get better. And if you can do that, you can build a thriving business.
Yeah, that's awesome. So there's 2 things you touched on there that I want to drill into a little bit, and they relate to one another. So the idea of relationship building and the idea of spending your time effectively, right? So you mentioned the concept, and I think of it as playing the long game. So, you may talk to someone, if you're trying to help them solve a problem, your solution may not be it. But if you run a clean cycle, add value, regardless of if your solution is the right fit or not, you're playing the long game. That person's going to come back to you some way or another at some point. And how do you balance that with the metric driven culture that we live in of, hey, we still have to produce results, right? I think I've been fortunate in 2 different stops where I've had 6 years. I was 6 years at Lead MD, and I was 6 years at the place before, where I had time, right? The first lead I ever talked to at Lead MD 6 years ago, I sold in year 5, right? Like, not everybody has that kind of longevity, but I think it does speak to the fact that if you play the long game, you're going to have a healthy pipeline for life rather than a healthy pipeline for right now. So can you tie those 2 together, right? Where do you want to be spending your time most effectively? Can you use that concept of playing the long game and tie it to spending your time effectively? Because I think there's a correlation there, and it's part of playing the long game.
Yeah, I think, like most things, it'll depend so much on the individual, the organization, and all the rest of it. I think that there are some organizations where they have their process so dialed in that, I don't want to say you don't need to think as a sales rep,
Okay.
or as an SDR, but they, some organizations are so dialed in that, a and I'm just conscious, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but like an average person can have above average results, right? Because the system makes them stronger, right? It's the company's brand, it's the company's product, it's the tools, it's the enablement, right? All of those things can take, an average person and have them just perform phenomenally well. Not every organization has that, right? If I look across our hundreds of customers, you can tell the organizations that have built the system that just lift everyone up.
Absolutely.
In other organizations where that isn't fully dialed in, or maybe you're all still learning because you're earlier in your maturity curve as an organization, I think that the worst thing that you can do is work all the time,
right?
Because there's a lot of I think there's a lot of value to the sprint model that many product teams and engineering teams take, which is, you know, think a bit, plan a bit, hypothesize, sprint as hard as you can, then look at the results, interpret them, talk about them,
Right.
you know, reflect on them. Well, you know, I tried this. Did it work? Why didn't it work? Okay, what should I try next? You know, talk to your peers, learn from them. It can be so easy to just, you know, continue grinding away without thinking. And we live in a world where we have so much leverage from our tools and our technology and social media and all of these other things that, you know, finding those improvements to your messaging, to your outreach, to your tone, to your, you know, to your training, to whatever, can have disproportionate impact.
Right.
And so, you know, I think that you do, you know, you benefit from, you know, I don't know if the right answer is half a day a week, a full day a week,
Yeah.
you know, one day every 2 weeks, but
Hard
I
to get
would
that
really
prescriptive.
encourage, yeah, I would really encourage folks to take that day to go, you know, go audit your time, right? How did I spend my time in the last week? Let
Yeah.
me go review those, you know, the conversations that I had that went well. Why do I think they went well? Let me go audit the conversations I had that didn't go well. Why didn't they go well? And just continue to iterate on that mental model that you're building, and honing your craft. And, you know, ideally you'll learn from that. Ideally you can do that collectively with other folks on your team, and then you all learn from each other. You all get better.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So let me ask you this: when you are huddling with your sales leadership, what metrics are you looking at?
You know, we do two things. We have a very metrics driven approach for the high level,
Okay.
and they're typically, you know, those are things like how many sales qualified opportunities are we generating, how many meetings are we generating, what's our hold rate. We double click on the number to understand the quality as well.
Okay.
So are these within our ICP? You know, what is the employee breakdown of these companies? So, you know, to what extent are we targeting enterprise versus mid-market versus SMB versus micro SMB?
Yep.
So, you know, pipeline, very, very important, because that's the thing that's most in our control.
For sure.
And, you know, we want to be able to look at that weekly and monthly. Then we look at our overall pipeline. We look at things like uh, the number of new POCs that we're starting, which for us is a very important metric because we know, you know, once folks start using the platform, they're going to see the magic, they're going to see the value, and so we want to track that. We track our conversion rates on those key, you know, stage 1 to stage 2, stage 2 to stage 3, et cetera.
The opportunity level.
At the opportunity level. And again,
Yep.
it's because those are leading indicators for us,
Right.
right? We can't manage to ARR, but we
Right.
can manage to the conversion rates. We can manage to, you know, the number of opportunities that we're setting. Um, and you know, on the sales side, I say those are primarily it.
Okay.
You know, when it comes to customer success, we're obviously looking at things like our gross retention for customers, our net dollar retention, our expansions, and so on, our net promoter score. But then on the more subjective side, we are spending a lot of time in our own product, looking at, for example, the quality of our interactions.
That was my
And
next
so,
question.
yeah, and it's, you know, we define what great looks like for an early stage conversation, and we use our product to tell us, you know, on an aggregate level, is our team having high quality early stage meetings? Are they doing the things that we want them to be doing? And then are those things leading to the better outcomes that we expected? And that lets us spot, for example, if you're ramping a new rep, the revenue may not materialize for 3 or 6 months.
Right.
But if we see that a rep is struggling to perform well against those objective criteria on an early stage conversation, that indicates to the manager that they should be getting involved. That, you know, maybe that rep needs additional help, maybe they need additional coaching, you know, maybe they need to go on a performance plan if things are not
Sure.
working out, et cetera. And so it's really subjective. And then we're doing things like film review, where we're looking at our market intelligence from our product, and we're trying to understand what are the key objections that we're hearing, What are the competitive landmines that are coming up in our deals, and are we appropriately set up and enabling our sales reps to handle those situations effectively?
Yeah. So how long did it take? I mean, obviously you've got hundreds of thousands of hours of data, right, to pour through to start to understand what great looks like. And what do you think is the MVP for you to have enough data to go off to say this is what our good at least should look like?
It's easier than you might think.
Awesome.
And the way that I would start is, um, you can, let's just say that you're an organization with no resources.
Mm-hmm.
What would you do? Well, you could take a new rep that just joined the organization, somebody who's very, very green, and you could
Right.
say, Rebecca is one of our top performing reps.
Okay.
I'd like you to go listen to 5 of her deals that she brought in, review the chorus recording.
Yep.
And I just want you to write down, the 5 to 10 things that you think she did really effectively in that call that led to, a positive customer experience.
Yeah. Whatever the outcome was.
Whatever the outcome was,
Yeah.
right? And that new person will go like, oh, that's really, well, first of all, like really strong opening to the meeting, right? She, set up a really clear agenda. It was very clear what you wanted to get
Right.
out of it. It was very clear, what the decision was going to be, right? It could be upfront contract if you're Sandler, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
It might be, wow, she asked 4 really effective, really specific questions. These were the questions.
Right.
In Chorus, we call those engaging questions.
Mm-hmm.
So the small number of questions that get the prospect to open up and share the most relevant information for you to understand, is this a real opportunity for us? You might notice, wow, like the sales rep shared 2 really effective customer stories. Here were the customer stories. Here's what they sounded like. And so on and so forth. And just take note of those things and start with that, right? Just write it down, socialize it, and say, hey guys, we think that our very best reps are doing these things consistently.
Right.
Let's all start ensuring that we're doing these 5 things really effectively, and then just start learning from each other. And once you get that, you'll start to see, okay, if we're all doing this more consistently, is the conversion rate increasing? If it is, great. It means that you've hit on things that truly matter. If they're not increasing, then there's something else going on. And that's when you can use, intelligence in a product like ours to, to surface, oh, well, it turns out that there are these topics that are coming up when deals are stalling or when we're losing. What are they? Right. And so technology like ours can help you dig into that. But to start with, you can start very simple. And like any good process, I think it's start with anything.
Right. Exactly.
Commit to it and just consistently try to, evaluate and improve.
Yeah. It seems like you're taking the idea of that mentor that I talked about earlier, but without that person having the burden of like taking that person under their wing and having to spend all of that physical time with them by giving them access to those recordings.
I think that you're exactly right. Like one of the biggest insights that I had after we started Chorus was, I initially thought it was all about the manager, because the managers are so, your frontline managers are so critical in any organization. They're probably, more important in many ways than the VP or the senior leadership. The challenge is that a great manager may not be amazing at discovery. They may not be amazing at competitive selling. They may not be amazing at prospecting. There's so many things that need to go right for a rep to be successful. But the really great managers will know how to create that environment where the team and whoever does have a superpower in a certain area says, hey, let me share what's making me successful in this area.
Right.
And I think that that's really powerful. If you can create a culture where it's team first and people aren't trying to hold their secrets close to their chest, but make it about, improving the team, then that becomes really magical. And a product like ours helps with that, because, you just realize, well, why put the manager in the middle of it? right? If you're really great at building rapport and building trust early on, I might just want to listen to 3 or 4 of your calls and see what you're doing, experience it for myself, and say, you know what,
Soak it all
I'm
in.
going to try Josh's, technique in my next meeting.
Yeah.
Let's see how that goes.
Yeah. So you started to touch on something that I find is interesting in the sales profession in general, and that is the concept of career pathing, right? Obviously, bigger organizations have more layers and whatnot, but the concept of if you're a seller and then that leap to management, it seems like that's the path, right? Like you sell and then you make this leap to management, but frankly, not all of us are cut out to be in management. I took a crack at that myself. I think when we met, I was the vice president of sales at LeadMD. I since stepped down from that position because it wasn't a fit for me. Designing process and enforcing rules wasn't my bag. So I had to ask my boss if I could, come back into a sales individual contributor role, which worked out, thankfully. What do you see? Like, frontline managers is a great example. Where do you go to get trained to be a frontline manager?
I think it's one of the biggest challenges that organizations have,
Yeah.
because that enablement program doesn't necessarily exist. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I think like for most things, it does depend on the individual, meaning,
Right.
I think individuals should take it upon themselves. Like if they want to be a great manager,
Right.
there's so many resources that are out there. There's so many mentors that are out there that are, there's a lot of information on LinkedIn. There are a lot of people,
Right.
peddling that information. I feel
Sure.
like you can get it. One of the most effective, there's some people like Matt Cameron, for example, who does the SASE sales management program. They have a phenomenal program for frontline managers, and they'll put you into a cohort, a group of other managers. He'll take you through Management 101. And as an organization, if you don't have a program like that, I would encourage sales leaders to go put your new managers through that program or
That's
a
huge.
program like it.
Yeah.
And it's things like, how do you run an effective one-on-one? How do you run an effective pipeline review? How do you run an effective deal review?
Mm-hmm.
Down to the level of, these are the questions that you should be asking. Here's the template that you want your teams to fill out. Another angle is, in every organization, there is variability.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in an organization that's big enough, I'm sure that there are great managers. And, much like Chorus, I would actually, like some of our managers, they record their one-on-ones and their pipeline reviews in Chorus,
Mm-hmm.
and they share those. So that, for example, if you are a VP or a CRO, I would argue that it's part of your responsibility to see how your frontline managers are running their one-on-ones and running their pipeline reviews.
Yeah.
Because that's just, those are the high impact meetings that
Right.
truly can move the needle on performance. And so getting them right and helping them get them right can just be massive. So yeah, I feel like I'm not maybe getting as precise as I could, but I agree it's a gap, and I think that it's one of the highest leverage points for many organizations.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's not an exact answer, but it's also one of those things to think about, because how often do you see, oh, you've been killing it, you've been our best rep for 3 years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, time for you to make the leap. And then 2 bad things happen. You lose the revenue from that great rep, and they're not that effective in that position. So it's like a double whammy. And maybe that rep is looking for something more, but it's not management. What does more look like?
Right. Or worse, and we see this a lot in our data, we find that there are 2 types of managers.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the conversation data in Chorus, the first type of manager will join a lot of the high impact meetings
Okay.
and effectively run the meeting. So if you look at their talk time in the meeting, they're doing most of the talking.
Okay.
And the second scenario is that you have managers that are joining fewer meetings, and when they are joining those meetings, they're speaking very little. They're still letting the rep run the meeting.
Okay.
Maybe they're chiming in occasionally in a very difficult situation. They're telling a really high impact story,
Right.
or something like that. And the the risk, I think, for many promotes to manager is that they act like the super rep,
Right.
where they want to get into the deal, they want to get into all the calls, and they're winning the deals for the reps, as opposed to really being there to observe and saying, okay, where does this rep need development? And how can I point them to the right resources, right? So that is, the first case is not scalable. That's the challenge. It's not scalable, and it's not going to help you just improve the overall attainment of that team. And so, that's another place where, going back to data can be so powerful.
Yeah.
Because you can show to the manager, and there's a great product called Atrium. I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with it, but they essentially just take all of the activity data and package it into very simple reports for managers, so that a manager can just look at the report and say, well, it looks like this rep isn't doing as well on scheduling follow-up meetings with new ops, and so that's an issue for them. Or this rep has 7 untouched opportunities out of their 25, and so let's ensure that they're doing that, and things like that, to just create leverage for managers, so that instead of spending time trying to figure out where the issues are, they can just identify the issue and then focus on helping improve the behavior.
Yeah, that's great. What I love about this is it is really crossing that chasm and using your own technology, drinking your own Kool-Aid, however you want to say it, to enforce quality, because that quality is going to drive the metrics at the end of the day, right? And that's what's really most important. So if you would sum up maybe a top 2-3 learnings at Chorus, what are the top 2 or 3 things that you see that makes a quality conversation?
Oh, wow. I think I think I would, for an average organization, I would start with the fundamentals. So the first thing is, are we getting the right people into the conversations and into the deal? And so at Chorus, we look at who are the people that are in the meetings, and are we getting them engaged? And so, our managers are looking at, are we accessing the right level of seniority? Do we have a VP in the conversation? Do we have enablement in the conversation? Do we have ops in the conversation?
Right.
Or are we limited to, frontline managers or directors, right?
Yep.
So are you getting the right people in the conversation? And when they are in the conversation, are they engaged?
Got it.
By looking at their talk time.
I like it.
Number 2 is the talk to listen ratio and engaging questions. Most salespeople underestimate how much they're talking. And it's very funny, because often when new reps start on the platform, if you were to ask them, in a typical, 1 hour long discovery meeting, how much talking do you think they do? They'll estimate, I aim for 50%.
Okay.
And then they look at the data, and it ends up being much closer to 75%.
Wow.
And they go, oh my God, I had no idea that I was talking that much. I really thought I was doing a better job at listening. And so just getting folks that data, it's like having, like a Garmin or something like that, an Apple Watch, to just give you those basic metrics. Am I asking enough questions? Or am I talking too much? Just reinforces that listening. And the reason for that is, your early stage conversations are so critical for you to figure out, do I want to invest more into this opportunity?
Such a great way to look at it.
And so, that would be number 2. And number 3, I would say, for many of our customers, is competition, and just deeply understanding in our competitive deals, how do our very best reps with the highest competitive win rates position versus the competition. And the reason for that is that our data shows that when a competitor comes up in a conversation, you're twice as likely to win the deal versus your average win rate.
Interesting.
And the reason for that is that for most sales teams, the number one reason you lose deals is to no decision.
No decision. Yep.
No decision, right? And so when a prospect brings up a competitor, it's an indication that they are actively investigating the space and they're likely in a buying cycle. And so it's very high leverage to dig deep and to understand, who on our team has the highest win rate against this competitor. And let me go hear exactly what they say, exactly what they do,
Yep.
and incorporate that into your repertoire. And so, I would say those are the fundamentals. And then from there, you can go deep into the rabbit hole. But
Yeah, no, I
a good
love it.
starting point.
You're getting into my own psychology here. And now I know why I love competitive deals so much. It's an instant qualifier. There's a buy cycle.
Exactly.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Roy, this has been awesome. So tell the listeners anything else you think they should know about Chorus or you.
Nothing about me. Number one, thank you so much for having me on. We're very, very passionate about helping revenue organizations right now, especially given COVID and everything that's happening. If you want to learn more about what we're learning from the market through our data analysis, I would encourage you to go to our website, www.chorus.ai, and look up the daily briefing. This is something where every morning, 8:35 a.m. Pacific, our CEO, Jim Benton, shares data-driven insights across our hundreds of customers around what we're hearing the market tell us about COVID-19 and the impact on business.
Wow.
And so we're seeing things like, for example, a 2x increase in payment terms lengthening. So customers talking about net 60, net 90 versus net 30, which was typically what we would see. We're seeing things around significant decreases in the amount of cold calling that's going on, even though connect rates are staying the same. We're seeing massive increases in the number of senior leaders that are joining calls. And the impact of that. And so there's just a lot of really interesting insights. I'd encourage you to go there, sign up. You can get those insights. And you can also get access to all of the other data-driven research that we publish around what the very best sellers and sales teams are doing.
Wow, what an awesome resource. I really appreciate that. That's great. Well, thank you, Roy, for joining, and have a great afternoon.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
You bet.